put down that camera and strap in. It's time for a new episode of TogChat Live. It's an open mic night for photographers. Get ready for 60 minutes of your photography questions in real time with answers from your host, Joe Edelman.
Hey gang, it's Monday night. It's time for TogChat. How's everybody doing? I hope you guys had a great weekend. I hope that all of you can still see that you didn't do the Donald Trump and stare at the eclipse without your sunglasses on. So we're going to try and avoid spending too much time on the eclipse tonight because I'm not going to lie, I've already seen a ton of really, really boring eclipse pictures. And what I mean by that is, honestly, you know, just the circle in the sky, boring. To me, the really, really cool eclipse pictures are the ones where people were smart enough to turn around and look in the opposite direction and photograph the people that were watching the eclipse. People photographer. Are you surprised by that? So anyway, as always, I've got a topic that I want to talk to you guys about tonight. We're going to dive right in. This is going to be one that a lot of people have a lot of opinions about. And I'm not doing it to stir things up. I'm doing it hopefully to educate a couple people, and probably just a couple, because it's kind of actually a divisive topic. And the topic is really simple. B&H and Adorama are not always the best places to buy camera gear. So let me explain how this even got started and became an idea for me to talk about. Recently, I had someone who's a regular follower of mine, a member of my group, say to me, and I quote, "I would never buy camera gear from Amazon.com. I will only buy from a reputable retailer like B&H Photo." Well, you know what? That got me to thinking about how much the process of buying camera gear has changed in the 40 years that I've been involved in photography. Some of it for the good, some of it for the bad. And I thought it would be a really good topic to discuss because there's some things that I know that a lot of you don't really understand about the whole retail process in the photography world. So for those of you that are out of the US, I will apologize in advance. This discussion, which will last for less than 10 minutes, is a little bit US centric, okay? But here's what I am confident about. I am confident that the majority of what I am going to teach you about B&H and Adorama and Amazon, some cool little tips, will work pretty much anywhere in the world. So, you know, to dial it back a little bit and give you a little bit of background and history, when I purchased my very first camera, I walked with 2 feet into a local camera store so that I could hold it in my hands and compare it to other camera models before I put down my hard-earned $75 to buy that camera. Hey, at age 11, believe me, that $75 might as well have been like $1 million. 5 years after that, I had my very first job at a different local camera store. Yeah, so like in my small town, 30 miles outside of Philadelphia, just like most small towns in the US in the mid-1970s, there was more than one camera store within a very close distance to my home. Just a few short years later, there were even 2 more. So there were 4 of them very near my home. And there were a ton of others that were a very short drive from where I lived. Not to mention that less than an hour away in Philadelphia, there were a few really big camera stores that, believe me, they had more gear than my teenage mind could even dream of at that point. So in my first 25 years of life, I wound up working at 4 different camera stores, all of which were focused on educating the customer first. Selling was second. Now, we all know the world evolves, right? I talk about that all the time here on YouTube, and sure enough, by the 1990s, many of the smaller mom and pop camera stores on Main Street, USA, they were gone. They were replaced by regional chains that had anywhere from like 5 to 50 locations in shopping malls all around the country. Now, at the same time, companies like B&H and Adorama in New York, they were coming to prominence in the photo retail world. And by the early 2000s, pretty much the mom and pop shops were gone. They were a thing of the past. And even a lot of those smaller regional retail chains, they were starting to close their doors. And history. By that time, Amazon was growing very rapidly, and the digital age had taken over retail, as well as taken over the way that we create pictures, right? So For much of the early to mid 2000s, I indeed was one of those photographers who bought all of my gear at B&H Photo and occasionally from Adorama. By 2010, it was really, really clear that B&H had completely standardized the industry. And I mean from the standpoint of pricing. For a photo retailer of any size, if you weren't selling at B&H's prices, you weren't selling. In fact, in Philly, what I loved about it, by 2010, you would walk into a camera store, and if you asked the salesperson behind the counter for the price on something, they would walk over to a computer that was sitting on the counter, and they would open up a web browser, go to B&H Photo's website, look up the price of the gadget or the lens or the camera that you were asking about, and that's the price they would quote you. They didn't even bother maintaining their own separate, pricing databases. There was no value to that. By 2010 and 2011, if you do a Google search, and in some cases even before that, there were already articles appearing very regularly on all the photography blogs proclaiming that camera stores were dead. So I thought I would share with you the way that I shop for gear in 2017. Some of you are going to respond to this philosophy the way that Democrats and Republicans respond to each other, right? You're set in your beliefs. You're not willing to consider other options. And that's okay. Some of you are going to learn a few new things, and hopefully I'll open up some new ways for you to learn about and shop about camera gear. So before I tell you my methods, let's level the playing field a little bit, okay? I've researched Amazon, B&H, Adorama, and quite a few of the regional chains, which I'll mention some of my favorite and preferred ones in a minute. Pretty much the industry standard today for camera retailers that still exist, 30-day return policy. So the idea of being able to buy something and return it if you don't like it, it's pretty much universal across the board. However, do pay close attention. Some of the regional chains, in other words, the smaller camera retailers, while they do have the 30-day return policy, they do have some very clear language on their websites that stipulates things like how many shutter actuations the camera can have within that 30-day window. Most of the ones that I've seen cap it at 200, because the idea is they don't want you buying the camera to go use it for a wedding and shoot like 5,000 frames on it and then, try to return the camera later, because at that point it's officially a used piece of gear, okay? So do at least make sure, if you're going to rely on that 30-day return policy with a smaller retailer, that you are, very careful about what that is. So also, I've talked about this before, and I just want to point this out again for those of you that maybe haven't heard it. I am a huge fan of renting your gear first. Now, obviously, for those of you that are watching and aren't in the US, I apologize. I know that in some parts of the world, the ability to rent camera gear is not really that universal yet, but it's getting better. It's getting a lot better, and it is spreading throughout the world. So, the idea of not being able to actually touch and use the camera, that's not becoming that much of a challenge anymore. So if at all possible, don't buy a camera because of a YouTube review. And I don't even care if it's my YouTube review. And don't buy the camera just because you've used that brand before. Buy it because you tried it. Period. There's absolutely no camera upgrade that is going to come out. No camera upgrade that you have to have the day that it comes out. There's no camera upgrade that is just simply going to change your world that fast. Unless, of course, you're a brand fanboy, and then, well, okay, but you're not using sensible logic at that point. Camera rentals are very inexpensive. Rent the camera, try it out, make sure that you know what you're getting. Cameras are not cheap, right? So it's worth investing a couple of days' time and a tiny bit of money in percentage to what the camera costs. Try it out. Make sure it's everything that you think it's going to be. Then make the purchase. So when it comes time to make a purchase, let's talk about how I do things. So locally for me in Allentown, Pennsylvania, I have no good options for being able to walk into a camera store. There is one camera store here in Allentown, PA that unfortunately it's terribly overpriced. They do not match They do not match the B&H prices at all. And this camera store survives by selling peripherals, things including processing frames, telescopes. They do lots of classes and workshops and all that. And that's great, but they're not competitive price-wise at all. So let's begin with B&H and Adorama, okay? Neither of them at this point is my go-to camera retailer, period. Now, I realize to some of you, that is just blasphemous to say that B&H and Adorama are not the first choices. So here's the thing. I have 3 primary reasons why they are not my first choice. So number 1, and this is, by the way, in order of importance, okay? Reason number 1, both of these companies, both B&H and Adorama, in the past couple of years, 2 to 3 years, have both had a lot of really bad news made very public about how they treat their employees, most specifically their warehouse workers. And honestly, I'm not trying to make this a political thing, but I really find it inexcusable. When you look at the volume of business that those 2 camera retailers do online, they could add a $1 per order surcharge to every order that comes in off their websites. And just by the sheer volume of the business they do, they could treat their employees better and they would look like complete superstars in the online retail world. So it's actually really a pretty easy fix. The second reason that they are not my go-to retailer, and this is still in order of importance, is that B&H and Adorama are no longer automatically the cheapest. I frequently get better deals either on Amazon or at some of the smaller regional retailers like Hunt's Photo and Video in New England, Robert's Camera in Indiana, Midwest Photo Exchange in Ohio, and even Sammy's Camera in California. And there are others, but these are ones that I've dealt with, so I can speak with them from personal knowledge. And then the third reason that B&H and Adorama are not my go-to first choices, it's speed. I'm an Amazon Prime user, and I happen to live very close to an Amazon warehouse, which means that pretty much anything I purchase on Amazon, it's going to be on my doorstep in 48 hours max, a lot of times even faster. Now, full disclosure, in all fairness across the board, I'm actually located pretty close to B&H's warehouse in New Jersey, so most of their shipments do arrive within 24 hours, but the trick there is, it depends on what time of day I place the order, and they don't ship it out as fast as Amazon does. And of course, Amazon is open 24/7, 365 days a year, while B&H and Adorama, they're closed every Saturday and several weeks out of the year for Jewish holidays. And call it Murphy's Law, call it whatever, but I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the websites with the idea, hey, I'll order this here, and they're closed. And of course, it's the, come back in 24 hours. And I'm not dissing anybody's religion, but at the end of the day, I'm there for business purposes. And so it's business. It's not, it's not religion. Okay? So this brings me to what I would recommend and I would encourage a lot of you to consider. And a little bit of this is with that mom and pop philosophy in mind. So believe me, I'm embracing evolution, but I don't want to lose sight of what's important. So I can't speak for every one of the regional camera store chains. I don't have firsthand experience with all of them. I saw that somebody a little bit earlier here mentioned K, how, I don't know how you say KEH. I know there's a decent sized small chain down in Texas. I've never done business with these companies, but the ones that I have firsthand experience with, all the ones that I mentioned earlier. So, that's Hunt's, that's Midwest Photo, that's Robert's Camera, Sammy's, all of them. I can tell you this. Just like the mom and pop stores from my childhood, from my early days in photographer, these regional retailers are education first, across the board. And I can't stress how important that is, but I want to get clear. To be fair, B&H and Adorama put lots of money and educational material on the internet, okay? A lot. So, I'm not trying to slam anybody. I'm not trying to put anybody down. I'm trying to be practical here. But look, don't be fooled by that fact. while it is definitely a great benefit to all of us that they have all those videos, understand it's a great marketing tool for them. It drives traffic to their online stores. So the kind of education that I'm talking about, it's the kind where you can walk into a store and not have to stand in a line with electronic numbers above 20 counter spaces. But instead, behind the counter are a few people who are passionate and knowledgeable about photography. And importantly, they're willing to share what they know and take the time to listen to your needs and help you make wise decisions. So to be clear, I'm not saying that B&H or Adorama or companies like that have bad customer service. No. In fact, they do go out of their way. And it's, believe me, their customer service is much better now than it was in the 90s. Much better. But it's not the same as walking into a small camera store where you can make that connection. So in other words, what I'm talking about here is personalized education. Not stuff that's online, but one-on-one with a human being. Now, some of you are going to say, yeah, that's great, Joe, but I don't live near any of these retailers. Here's the thing, okay? Even if you don't live near one of these companies that I've mentioned, you can still do business with them online and you can still call them on the phone. We all have phones in our pocket right now. But these are companies that are going to take the time with you. They're going to listen to you. They're going to understand your needs and goals. And why did they do that? To quote the owner of one of these stores that I had the opportunity to talk with while I was up at the NECC conference in Massachusetts, Gary Farber from Hunt's Photo and Video in New England. Their primary focus when it comes to customers is building relationships. That's the whole point, okay? They don't want that quick sale. They'll take a sale, of course, but they're not interested in making a quick sale and making a quick buck. They're interested in being the place that you're going to turn to when you need something, which that's what so many of us just automatically did with B&H and Adorama. Why did we do that? We did it because they made it easy. We did it because not only did they make it easy, they had everything in stock at all times, and they had tons of it. They had stuff that you never even dream of, but if you spent enough time on their website, you could find it. But there are other options for that now, and that's the key. So, in the case of Hunt's in New England, one of the things that I find is awesome about this company, and they're not the only one. Some of these other companies that I mentioned do the same thing. They sponsor loads of camera club and PPA photography and education events like annually. They allow camera clubs and PPA groups, they do sponsoring to allow them to bring in speakers that are internationally known into the New England area to work with local photographers. The owner, I mentioned Gary Farber at Hunt's, believe me, he's a fixture at pretty much anything that happens in the photography world in New England. He even sponsors high school students so that they can attend a lot of these professional events. And the way he'll describe it is very simple. He's finding them at the beginning of their careers, building relationships with them so that hopefully they will want to do business with him for the rest of their careers. So here's my wish for you. Do some real research. Don't get so set in your ways that you're missing out on great prices and even better yet, great service. As I said, the world does evolve. That doesn't mean that there's no place for small customer-centric camera stores. It just means that the companies who don't figure that out, they're the ones that are going to become dinosaurs. And believe me, that can happen to any of them, including B&H and Adorama. So a couple other points that I wanted to make about online shopping. And then we're going to wrap this up and I want to get into your questions here, okay? With regards to Amazon, and believe me, I have no skin in this game, but I feel that Amazon takes a bad rap because in many cases I feel that people don't actually understand how Amazon works as a retailer. So this person that made that statement to me about, I would only shop at a reputable dealer, it became very clear as I talked to this person that they absolutely did not understand because I took them to a web browser and I went and right away I pulled up the 8200 flash and pointed out to them that it was being sold by Adorama on Amazon. So, the thing that you need to understand when you look up photography gear on Amazon is that frequently it's not being sold by Amazon. It's being sold by Adorama. It's being sold by Hunt's Camera, by Midwest Photo Exchange. All these retailers, they have online stores at Amazon. It's a way for them to further their reach. But the best part of it is if you purchase there, especially if you're a Prime member, you're getting all the benefits of doing business with Amazon. So, number one, sure, are there junk retailers on Amazon? Absolutely. Could Amazon do a better job of maybe managing that or preventing those kind of companies? Yeah, and if we're being fair, Amazon actually does a pretty good job of that. But let's face it, there's always room for improvement in that stuff. But the other thing that I want to point out that is really great about Amazon, I have been able to find some of the most amazing gadgets at Amazon. The challenge a lot of times is that you're searching a photography website. We'll do B&H. And again, this is nothing negative about B&H at all. But you're searching a website, and at B&H, they have like recommended accessories for things. And most of the time when you're looking at some piece of gear, whether it's a flash or a camera or that kind of stuff, you're going to get, accessory lenses, accessory memory cards, the standard categories. What I love about Amazon is their recommended things goes much, 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 much deeper. So if you ever pay attention, when you're shopping for camera gear on Amazon, if you pay attention to all the recommended pieces, you will frequently stumble upon gear that you didn't even know it existed, which is awesome. So I really, really encourage you to check some of that stuff out, okay? So all that being said, I'm done. As I expected, some of you have some strong opinions about that. A lot of you, I'm really pleased to see, actually kind of really supportive on the idea that there's a lot of opportunity with these smaller companies. Again, I have no skin in that game. I really just wanted to, point out to all of you that there's more than one way to shop for gear. Tim Martin, yeah, Helix went away. Calumet's going away. A lot of the kind of bigger, more pro-oriented chains have, all kind of passed away along the wayside. But, there are definitely still opportunities and options that are out there. So don't get so set in your ways that you're missing out on that stuff. Make sure that you're looking for opportunities. Number one, to save money. Number two, to be able to learn and actually talk to people. Okay, so let's get down to business, all right? The stuff that you guys are all here for. I've seen a whole bunch of questions getting loaded in here, which is great. If you have questions, now's the time. Start typing. I'll back up and try and get the others. We got a lot of people here. Sean, Tim, Jarek, Bill Day, Cassandra. I know Doreen's here. Steven's here. Mark's here. Jono, Marcos, Jeffrey Thompson, Bill Day. Thank you guys. I always appreciate you guys coming out on a Monday night. I wanted to take 1 second real quick. I'm going to switch my screen over here. A shout out to a young lady who frequently is actually here for the live feeds. Maybe she is here tonight. I just haven't seen her name go by yet. But a lot of you who watch the YouTube videos, who follow me, are familiar with Irene Rudnick. Irene is a wickedly talented photographer. I am honored, like sincerely honored, because it's someone whose work I sincerely admire. But Irene released a video today about 10 photography YouTube channels that you should watch. I'm proud to say I was at number 3 on the list, which is really pretty cool. So Irene, I don't know if you're here, but hopefully you will at least see this at some point. And I just want to say thank you sincerely. Obviously, as a YouTuber, we always appreciate exposure. Irene is here. Irene, seriously, awesome. I can't tell you like how flattered I am. You know that I'm a huge fan of your photography. So obviously, just that alone, I sincerely appreciate. And of course, as YouTubers, we always appreciate exposure because it helps us get the word out, helps people find out about what we're doing. Irene, I guess more than anything, I really appreciate your comment about the no BS. Sincerely appreciate it. So thank you very, very much. So let's get into some questions because I know that's what you guys are here for. Tardive Country, congratulations on your D5300. Nice little camera. I think you will enjoy it. Definitely a great camera to get started out with. So I am going to scroll all the way back to the beginning here real quick. So I apologize if I'm making you dizzy on that screen there. Marcos had the first question. So for you guys, I'll give you a little insider tip. because I'm sure none of you have anything better to do, right? But usually on a Monday night on TogChat, definitely by 6 p.m., usually by about 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time, US, so that's UTC -4, I'm in the chat room because I'm setting things up and getting everything ready and all that stuff. So the conversation actually starts way before 6:30. So you're more than welcome to join us if you ever have the time. But tonight, Marcos had a question that I thought was kind of an interesting one because it's kind of deep. And the question is, what is the first skill that a photographer must develop? So full disclosure, when I saw his question, my first reaction was to laugh and say, uh-oh, that's going to be a challenging one to answer because a lot of people are going to debate on it. And so while I was getting ready, I was, kind of trying to think through that and say, okay, there's a lot of directions I could go with this question, but if I've got to have one answer, where do I set my priority? So this is another one of those divisive kind of answers. For me, I think that the most important, number one thing that a new photographer has to learn, and I'm going to make one assumption here. So I want to throw this assumption, and that assumption is that this is a person who is passionate about photography and learning. Okay, so that number one thing for me is they must learn how to see. Now, I want to be really clear. I am saying that is more important than learning all the controls on your camera, than learning everything about the inverse square law, than learning everything about Photoshop, but it's to learn how to see. Even for the most talented and creative people, seeing photographically is a skill that has to be developed. For some people, it comes a little easier, so they get to start a little higher on the scale. Other people have to work very, very hard at it. You all have heard me use the phrase frequently, the idea of success in photography is in the details. It's the details that really make the difference. Now, that can apply to anything from a twisted strap in front of the camera, to a smile that's maybe a little tense, to a weak or loose composition, to overdoing the post-processing in Photoshop. If you are not seeing and recognizing those details, then it doesn't matter how much you learn about the physics behind photography or the science behind photography. So it really is about the seeing. So Marcus, that's my answer. Must learn to see first. A great way to do that, literally for the sake of constant practice, is the iPhone or whatever smartphone you have, and just use it and use it and use it. But again, as you guys have heard me say many, many times, all this YouTube stuff is great. I love you for being here. I really appreciate the support. I know Irene does as well. But if you don't go and pick up your camera and really shooting once a week is not learning how to do photography. So Tim Martin, photographer. I am going to be in Chicago next June. I think it's around the 24th. I'm not listed on the website yet, but I can say I will be there. It's official. It's the program called Out of Chicago. I will be one of the instructors. It's a full weekend in Chicago. It's both kind of classroom learning and lecturing, and also some photo walks. So I'm actually really looking forward to it. I will make a full-blown announcement once they are ready to update the website with the full speaking roster that's coming up, but very much looking forward to it. And any excuse to go to Chicago, not in the wintertime, I'm there totally. So James Parrish, Irene and I have briefly talked about doing an interview, and it's all on me that we haven't, but I want to, and I will. We definitely, I would love more than anything to be able to try and catch up with her sometime, in person. James Parrish, thank you so much, man. I really, really appreciate it. But worst case scenario, we will do it the same way I did it with Manny via Skype. But I definitely want to talk to Irene, and I've got some other interviews that are in the works and coming up. I was going to start doing them kind of randomly, but I got a little idea in the works, so there's going to be a bunch of them kind of all grouped together. So that's coming, gang. Okay, so let me scroll back up here. Eric, when in post, what do you do for a model who has very noticeable veins in her eyes? Do you Photoshop them or leave them? Photoshop them, man. Why would you leave them? Nah, I mean, that's almost kind of one of those Murphy's Law things, especially when you're working with a new model. If you're working with a new model, guaranteed the day of her photo shoot, she's nervous. So the stress alone, she's going to wake up with a pimple right on her forehead. Part of my prep for models when I'm doing photo shoots, especially if it's like a new or an inexperienced model, is to tell them, hey, listen, if you wake up the morning of your shoot and you realize there's like a big pimple on your forehead, don't touch it. Leave it alone. Don't pop it. Don't try to get rid of it. That's exactly what Photoshop is for. The challenge is if they mess with it and, try to get rid of it, it just makes it worse. And in fact, my makeup artist, if somebody comes in with a pimple, we don't do a lot to cover the pimple because when you start to put makeup over top of it, you're just adding mass to it, which makes the retouch job that much more work. So generally, if anything, here's a little tip for everybody. Ready? What we will put on a pimple that's kind of red and blotchy, we will use Visine. Yeah, that's stuff that you use in your eyes because it gets the red out. The tetrahydrozoline will take the red out of your skin. You use just a little bit of it, you put it on, takes a couple minutes, you put it on again, takes a couple minutes, you put it on again. Usually by about the third time, most of the redness is gone from the pimple area and you've at least got the skin tones blended down. But definitely you don't want to put all kind of heavy makeup over top of it because that just builds up the size of it and requires that much more retouching. So, but yeah, I mean, people can miss their morning coffee and next thing you know, their eyes are bloodshot, stress, all that kind of stuff. So absolutely take that out. You look at the best of the best when it comes to beauty photography, high-end portraiture, all that kind of stuff. You're not going to see veins in the eyes, period. Not going to be there. That doesn't mean you make it so fake they look like zombie eyes that are about to light up at you. But yeah, you take care of those veins, okay? Let's see here. I know there was another set of questions that went by. Bill Day, which of your videos addresses the topic of dealing with and controlling specular highlights in portrait? You know what, Bill, unfortunately, I actually don't have anything that is really specifically about that. I mean, I talk about a lot with lighting in portraits, but I will completely be honest. I always take it more from kind of the standpoint of best practices, so I haven't really done too much with the idea of specular highlights in portraits. So I'm not sure also if you're referring to that in terms of a specular highlight in the background, i.e. bokeh, or if you're talking a specular highlight on the subject because the lighting was not done well. Okay? So if you want to fill me in a little bit more about that along the way, I will try and help you out there. So, JR the other day broke a pimple, makeup went all the way haywire. Yep. So it's a lot more work. Normal Visine is what does it. Yes, it's the chemical that's in Visine. Again, you have to use a couple applications of it to get it out. And it's only for the red. It's not going to make a pimple go away. Like, I want to be clear. I don't want you all thinking out like I've just come up with like a cure for pimples. No, it takes the blotchiness out. That's all. Okay? So you really have to kind of look at it from the standpoint of just how bad is the pimple. If it's a little pimple, don't do anything. Just retouch it. Tell the model not to pop it or scratch at it or pick at it or any of that kind of stuff. And you'll be fine. Access to Peter, yes. So specular highlights, sorry, there is the video about shooting with glasses. So if you're talking about specular highlights on glasses, that one is there, okay? John Edward Calvino, what is the added benefit of white correction cards and discs? Since this can be adjusted in post when shooting in RAW, should I still invest in one? You know what? That's a great question. So let's work that thought through here for a second because I know there's going to be a lot of opinions on that one, and that's okay. When you're shooting RAW, essentially you can adjust your color balance easily in post to pretty much anywhere you want it to be. All the data is preserved, so you can do that. So then that brings up the question when you are shooting in camera, is there any real value to go ahead and do a custom white balance with an expo disc or working off a white card or a gray card or any of that? I guess my honest answer to you would be, it depends on where you are in the learning curve. One of the things, and I had another conversation about this recently with someone where I found that, at the point that they are in the learning curve, they had read about doing the custom white balance somewhere, And because they admire the photographer who does it, they thought, my gosh, I have to start doing that because that photographer does it and it's really, really important. It's not that important, provided that you're doing custom white balance in post, okay? So while I do it, I'm a big fan of it, I would actually discourage you from doing it early on in the game. Is it giving me a big advantage over you? No. You know what it's really doing? It's really showing me in camera that I've got good white balance and all the colors are working well together. That's all it's really doing for me. It's not making my finished image any better. It's making sure that the JPEG preview on the LCD screen is accurate to what I'm doing in the studio. My preferred version for all those, and I'm a Nikon guy, is to use the Expo disc by Expo Imaging. Basically, you set, in my case, I set my Nikon into custom white balance mode, and then I walk around behind my subject and aim the camera with the Expo disc over the lens, aim the camera back at the main light source, and fire a shot. This, of course, is after I've determined the proper exposure for the shot. Now what it's going to do is automatically create a custom white balance profile that is stored in the camera for that lighting setup, okay? And it's stored until the next time I change it. That's it. So it's not like it's a permanent thing that's there forever, because that actually wouldn't be a good thing. So that being said, if I'm in a hurry, do I stress at all about picking up a camera, running out the door, and setting the camera on auto white balance? No. I mean, obviously that doesn't really happen to me that much unless I'm shooting like my grandson, but I want proper color if I'm shooting my grandson, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't worry about it in that sense, but as a habit of workflow, I do try to make sure that all the color relationships in my scene are working well. Custom white balance is kind of the best and easiest way to do that. So Marcos, how to deal with that insecurity feeling that the gear is the limit for shooting better pictures. Wow, Marcos, you've got all these like really deep questions tonight. You know, honestly, Marcos, that's probably one of the hardest things I think for a lot of photographers to deal with. You know, if your work is not where you want it to be, and then you look at some other photographer and they've got that new $4,000 or $5,000 Sony A9 and this great, you know, lens with some really weird name that no longer needs an adapter and all that stuff. It's like, well, my God, I can't do what they do unless I have the same gear. I mean, that's crap. And of course, let's face it, you all learn that, you all hear that, you all read that, you see Joe talk about it, you see tons of people talk about it. But still the logic is to think, but if I had that, I'd be leveling the playing field, okay? So, you know, at the end of the day, it's really just a matter of realizing that there are no shortcuts. If you're being honest with yourself, and this applies to most of us, so I'm by no means picking on Marcos here, but if we're being honest with ourselves, the mistake that most of us make when it comes to having gas, you know, it's one of two things. It's either, you know, those of us that just like the toys, but the people that just like the toys usually have the ability to afford that. So, you know, so be it. Or it's the people that indeed think they've got to level the playing field. In other words, the way for them to achieve what the others are achieving is to get that better gear. And realistically, what you're doing when you do that is you're trying to take a shortcut. And the shortcuts don't get you there because you can go get all that better gear. So now you've leveled the playing field and then your work still sucks. The reason it sucks is you don't have the foundation behind it. So, you know, I consider myself very lucky that starting as a teenager, I didn't have unlimited funds. I literally did pay for my own camera out of my own savings. My parents wouldn't let me get the camera. And so finally my father got so tired of listening to me. He said, look, if you really want it, you've got money in your bank, in your savings, go get it. So I did it just to piss my parents off. Literally, I took the money out of the bank and went and bought the camera. And, you know, from there, the problem was, which my parents understood, I had no money to buy more gear. And my parents didn't have the money to give it to me. My father worked in a factory. He literally, and honest to God, I thought my parents were going to get divorced. He literally went out and he took out a loan. He talked to the man that owned the industrial park where he worked, that owned all the buildings and the property. And he got that man to agree to give him the contract to cut the grass, to do all the landscaping in this entire industrial park. It was like 12 buildings. So he then went to the bank and he took out a personal loan to buy a riding lawnmower. So literally through the spring, the summer, and early fall, every day after school, and in the summer, most of the days of the week, in the mornings, I would go and I would cut grass. And the deal was, as long as I did all the grass cutting myself, as long as I did the work and my father didn't have to do it, I gave him the money each month for the loan, but I got to keep everything else. And so that's how I bought my gear. But it still was a long process. So, by the time I was like 16 to 17, I had more gear than most kids my age. In fact, I had a lot more gear than adults. But I bought it all used. And I bought it literally like, it was kind of a piece at a time when I could get enough money to get it. So what that forced me to do, though, since I couldn't just rush out and buy everything I wanted, it forced me to shoot with what I had. And it forced me to learn how to work with what I had. And even today, now that I can afford to go buy something or stick it on a credit card, I really do, even myself, have to remind myself from time to time. It's like, no, don't do that. You don't really need that. You just want that. Wait until you need it. Wait until you actually have a need for it. And then go and purchase it. And that's always the challenge. So let's see. Stephen, I'd like to get your thoughts on shooting in parks and outdoors that are more and more requiring photography permits. Do you think this may prompt the portrait market to move back into studios? Stephen, the portrait market never left studios. So that's the first thing. We have to be fair here. I know there is another YouTube photographer that likes to grandstand about needing permits and how the police are unfair and it shouldn't have to be that way and all that crap. Look, here's the reality. Humans are just stupid as crap, period. So the fact that you now need these permits is because people have done dumb stuff. Don't think for a second that these law enforcement agencies and local municipalities want to have to micromanage photographers in a park. They don't. But they do it because people are idiots. Period. So that's what we have to deal with. So, that being said, I don't believe that portrait photography's ever left the studio. Certainly, shooting outdoors became popular, but let's look at why, Stephen. Shooting outdoor portraiture became popular because, number one, as photography became more readily available to the masses, and this is even before digital, because let's face it, even in the 1990s, film was progressing to the point that you had exposure latitudes of 2 to 2.5 stops, which means you could really, if you're shooting color negative film, you could really screw up your exposure and still pull out a really functional image. So even though it wasn't digital on a computer, you had a situation where it was becoming easier and easier to take decent pictures. And I say decent, kind of in air quotes, but still to take decent pictures. So, but at that point, the challenge was, if somebody, wanted to take nice pictures and they managed to get up money for a decent camera and a lens, it was still a big leap to be able to rent a studio space, to purchase studio equipment. And back in the 1990s especially, lighting gear, like the kind of stuff we use today, speed lights and all that kind of stuff, even umbrellas, softboxes, all those things, in relationship were much, much more expensive then. In terms of scale, the prices have come down dramatically on that gear. Plus, back in the 1990s, you didn't have online retail, and you didn't have Chinese and Korean manufacturers knocking off every American or major brand name product and doing a much, much cheaper version. So this stuff was not accessible to people. So what wound up happening is more and more people shot portraits outside, because outside, they didn't have to rent 4 walls. They didn't need strobes. You could DIY a reflector even then, or at least even if you bought reflectors were cheap on scale to all the other things. So, the way I look at it, I don't care where you live, there are always places that you can shoot outdoors. I mean, in all fairness, like, drop me in the middle of a shopping center parking lot and I'll find cool backgrounds to work with. That's a photographer's job. That's what being a photographer is. So if we're talking about shooting portraits, and since you're talking about market, Stephen, I'm going to assume we're talking about, making money. In all fairness, and I'm not trying to talk down to anybody, but let's be realistic. If you're going to charge money, then it's your responsibility. Solve the problem. I don't have a problem shooting outdoors at all. One of the parks here in Allentown that I routinely shoot in requires a permit. I've never had a problem. And I've also never gotten a permit because I've respected the intent, the city's intent for why they require the permit. I've respected that. I've never gone out of those bounds, so nobody's ever felt the need to stop me. Because most of these regulations in most of these towns, they haven't put these permit requirements in place to be able to make money. They've put them in place to protect the city or the town because people are idiots. That's the why behind it. So I don't think that it's going to prompt it to move back into studios. The high-end portrait market has never left studios. It's just a different style, different option, etc. So, Sinaz, is there a disadvantage to shooting an 85mm lens on full frame at 1.5 crop to give you 135mm focal length and flatten the face more? Okay, so your question is incorrect. So let me explain. I totally understand what you're trying to ask me, but you're overlooking one piece. The last part of your question, the 85mm lens on a so for those of you that maybe don't understand that, a lot of full frame cameras, for instance, like my Nikon D810, I can put my 85 on it, but then I can set the camera to shoot in DX mode. Even though it's a full frame camera, if I want, I could get it to shoot like an APS-C. So that basically implements the crop factor, which indeed is the equivalent of 130mm focal length. But it's not going to flatten the face more. The 130mm focal length thing, that's just the crop. So it gives you a crop that is equivalent to 130mm. It's still an 85mm lens. So it's not going to flatten the face any more in APS-C than it does in full frame. That's the thing that so many people are mistaken about. Plus, for my own personal taste, I have no problem shooting a close, tight portrait at 85mm and full frame. I've never felt that I'm getting any kind of bloating or that. Not at all. I would prefer not to shoot at 130 or 135mm, whether it's full frame or APS-C, because for my taste, if it's a portrait, if it's a head and shoulders portrait, or even just a traditional kind of bust up portrait, 135mm for me is a little further away than where I want to be for a portrait. You guys have heard me joke about some of these guys now. You see them all over Facebook and some on YouTube where their thing is to go out with a 400mm lens and shoot portraits with a 400mm lens, or shoot models full length with a 400mm lens. And when you get to their behind the scenes shots, it's great. They're like 50 feet away. It's like, do you wear like walkie-talkies with earpieces so the models can hear you? And what you wind up with is a shot that's got such shallow depth of field that it looks surreal. In fact, what it looks like is like you shot it in the studio. You could literally, those shots, you could recreate them in a studio. So I don't want to be that far away from my subject. I want to be able to interact with my subject. So the reason why you're thinking that is actually not going to play out that way. You will not get additional compression by switching to the APS-C with that lens. You'll get the same amount of compression that you will with a full frame. Okay? Jarek, what do you think the new photographer should invest in chronologically? Good body, lens, editing, computer, workshops. Take workshops off. Like, I'm not kidding. I teach. Remember that, right? Too many people spend too much money on workshops too early with the wrong expectations. Okay? And that's a whole nother topic. In fact, maybe I'll make that, I'll tell you what, I'll make you all promise. I'll make that my topic for the opening of next week's TogChat. And this will be the title. You ready? Why most photography workshops suck. That'll be the title. I'll tell you all about it next week. So, but that being said, Jarek, what should people start with? I think the smart thing to do is start with a camera that you can afford, period. Okay? Because the key thing is, in your question, new. So a new photographer is somebody that just found photography. They aren't in a position yet to really declare, I want to be a professional. Like, nobody ever picks up a camera for the very first time and says, I want to be a professional photographer. Let me go buy a camera. I've never met that person because that person's an idiot. All right? People go buy a camera because they think it's really cool and interesting and it would be fun to, do that kind of stuff. But they never go out for the very first time to buy that camera with the intent of being professional. So, I think there's definitely kind of an evolution that a photographer has to go through. But once they are at the point where they've determined that they're serious and potentially passionate about it, I think number one, a good camera body. Number two, a few good lenses. I think at a minimum, and this is, again, this is not the start, but this is kind of in the chronological order. I think in a minimum, you start out with the 50mm lens. You should have a wide angle lens. You should have at least a short telephoto lens. There's a great argument for a lot of people to not need a lens that's over 100mm in length, depending on, of course, what you're intending to shoot. So, you know, I would say that's first. I think after those three things, then you get into simple lighting, like a speed light, one speed light. On a parallel to that, so shortly after you buy the first camera and first lens, you need to start paying some attention to the software, i.e. Lightroom, maybe Photoshop, but probably Lightroom. And initially, really just processing tools. You know, basically the stuff that's in the Camera Raw plugin or the stuff that's in the Develop panel in Lightroom. That's the initial part. Believe me, come on, we see it all the time. We see it in my Facebook group. We see it all over the internet. People that are really, you know, getting way ahead of themselves on the Photoshop side to the point that they're becoming Photoshoptographers. You know, they're doing all this really cool stuff in Photoshop, but their photography still sucks because they aren't paying any attention and or don't know what they're doing in camera. So that's a problem. Okay. Hey boy 88, what's a good all-around lens? There is no such thing. I mean, literally, it depends on what you want to shoot, depends on what kind of photography you like to do, and it depends on your budget, and it depends on your brand. The problem with that question, hey boy, is for me to answer that, it would just be blowing a lot of hot air because I don't know you, what kind of camera you have, what your budget is, what you like to shoot, all those things. So you got to frame that a little bit differently, and I'll try and give you a little bit more input. Plus, do me a favor, I'm going to assume that you already have a camera, so when you give me the rest of that information, tell me what lenses you already have, okay? And what camera. So, Randy, been shooting on a Nikkor 28-300 for everything you want to do. Woo! And I want to focus on portraits. Which lens should I add to my D750? Okay, so, Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, but that 28-300 is a DX lens. And I may be wrong. You guys know I'm not a gear junkie, but since it's Nikon, I guess I should know a little bit better. I believe the 28-300 is a DX lens. In which case, your D750 is a full frame lens, so you're not getting full advantage of that. Now, let's assume just for a second until somebody corrects me that I'm wrong and that it is a full frame lens. 28-300 in one lens, it's a huge range to cover. It also means it's going to be a slow lens. James Brown, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the super chat. It also means that 28-300 is going to be a slow lens. It's probably like an f4.5 to f5.6, meaning it doesn't have constant aperture. It's going to change depending on the focal length. For portraits, Randy, I would encourage you to get away from the zoom. Simplify things. I talk in a lot of my videos. If you visit my YouTube channel and look at the video. Okay, so back to the 28-300. Robert Bechtel, the 28-300 is definitely FX. Cool, thank you for that. Okay, Randy, I see that. Nope, FX. All right, so that's cool. I mean, but still, that's a wicked range to carry in one lens. If you're going to do portraits, let me switch over here real quick to my YouTube channel. I would encourage you to watch the video that I didn't find. Let me find the video here really quick. And it's a video that I did about best lenses for portraits. This one right here, Randy. Watch this video. In that video, I talk about a Tokina lens. Not a brand I ever thought that I would buy, not alone like tell people, oh my God, this is like an amazing lens. Less than $400. Old school build, brass interiors, super, super awesome lens. It's a Tokina 100mm f2.8 macro lens. Very reasonably priced. Great build quality. It is hands down the sharpest lens I have ever worked with in my entire life. Lens is like awesome. So I would encourage you to go take a look at that for portraiture. Okay. Anand, yeah, I know Anand's a big fan of the Tamron 90mm 2.8, which I've read lots of great stuff about. I've just never had a chance to use it. But again, that 90mm 2.8 from Tamron, that's like in that same range. You know, we're talking for portraits. Basically, my favorites are anywhere from like 85 into the 100mm range, okay? Yes, you can do portraits. I said earlier, I'm not a big fan of 130 or 135mm, but you can do good portraits in that range. You will find, especially with Nikon, their older style 135s are really inexpensive lenses. So, you know, that's also something to consider there depending on your budget. But you'll still be able to get that Tokina for less money. And no, I'm not sponsored by Tokina. I don't make any money on it, period. It's an awesome lens, okay? So, hey boy, so you got a 77D Canadian old 18 to 55 Canon stock lens, old version Sigma 20 to 300, also an old version. So you're looking for more of a wide angle. So here's what I would tell you. Don't take my word. But I'm going to give you two things to consider, and you should go out and look into this and not take anybody's word. So that means you need to go out and find somebody that's got each of these two lenses so that you can actually look through them first. I'm a huge, huge fan in the wide angle range of 24 millimeters. Especially when I did newspaper work, 24 millimeter was my go-to lens. You know, if I wasn't shooting telephoto, 24 is my go-to lens. And the reason being, you guys know I'm all about fill the frame, right? So with a 24 millimeter, when you're shooting news, you had to get really, really close to fill the frame. So what happens is when somebody looks at your picture in the paper, it almost makes them feel like they are right there. In fact, you know, if you look at any of the big news events, even like the stuff that went on like in Charlottesville, Virginia a couple weeks ago, any of the big news events, you'll see that the wide angle lenses are always the go-to choices for photographers unless they're unable to get close. So I'm a big fan of the 24, but now you know why I'm a fan of the 24. A lens that might be a little bit more practical, depending on your needs, is a 35 millimeter. The big difference between the two, the 24 millimeter is wider, but it's also easier to create distortion. In other words, things falling over, okay, and keystoning with the 24. So try them both out. Dwayne, you're right. You can rent both of them, check them out. But I would definitely encourage you do that before you buy. Don't take anybody's opinion, because the opinion is going to come from their personal taste. So that's why I shared with you my personal reason. Trevor Baldwin, thank you so much, man, for the super chat. So since you started your daily iPhone photos, what have you learned from the shooting project that you can take back to portrait photography? So actually a couple of things. As I mentioned in the smartphone video that I did 2 weeks ago, it has reaffirmed my belief that 365-day-a-year photo projects are really a horrible idea, because it is. It's like the New Year's resolution. When you're drunk, it's such a great idea. It's wonderful. And then a couple days when you sober up, it's like, what the hell was I thinking? This is like a lot of work. So as I had explained, you know, several times before, my whole process for years has been either take a picture every day or at least really think through a shot. So really the switch in doing this project was, no, actually make the picture, make a shot every day. So for me, Trevor, I will tell you there's one very specific thing which you see hints of it showing up even in the video that I just did this weekend. In fact, I should bring you all up to speed really quick. This past weekend, for those of you that do, you know, follow what I'm doing on YouTube, I released a video as soon as I can get it to go back here a page. Sorry. Released this video about the Rapidome, which is a brand new light modifier from PhotoFlex. Two quick points. Number one, I do not get paid to talk about equipment, ever. Never have, never will. PhotoFlex did hand me a Rapidome. I love them for that. As I mentioned in the video, truthfully, I purchased the second one. It's coming tomorrow. Paid cash. It's mine. Okay? I love it. I think it's awesome. Great. So that being said, Trevor, you'll see a little bit of it showing up in this video that I just released, but you're going to see more of it. If I were to take you chronologically through my work with models since, I would say the early 2000s up until now, you will see in my earlier work in the early 2000s, I used much more bright color, like in your face. Like I was yellows, blues. I was like Mr. Primary Color. In fact, I used to joke back then that I never graduated kindergarten when it came to color. Like I was all about primary colors. Over the last probably 6 or 7 years, I seem to have like gotten away from that. So if you are following that iPhone Instagram channel that I'm doing, you'll notice that I'm migrating back. Even if you go to the first couple pictures when I started it to where it is today, you'll notice there's a very clear-cut trend with the color. I'm really getting back to my roots and loving the bright, bold color. And so what's happening now is, even when I'm out and about with my iPhone, I find myself very specifically looking for bolder colors and then doing interesting things with that. But also in the studio. 3 weeks ago, I had the video about the Christmas tree lights where I had the model wearing the bright yellow shirt, she had the blue lipstick, and the bright eye color. So you're seeing, like, I'm really getting back to my color roots. So that's actually, for me, that's the biggest thing. It's really kind of just reminding me about stuff that I had a lot of fun with. And it's allowing me to bring that fun back into what I'm doing with my portrait and my beauty work and that kind of stuff. So for me, that's the takeaway so far. Could change. We'll see. So let's see here. Where we at? Hey boy, not much of a portrait photographer. Really want to try out landscapes. And honestly, it's going to be 24, 20, or 24, 28, or 35. Rent them, test them first. But definitely, if you're doing landscapes, go for the wide angle. Steven Styles for photojournalism, 24 to 70, 7200. Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. For photojournalism, those would be the two lenses. The only variation I had, when I got into digital work in 2000, I worked for 6 months full-time on the staff of a newspaper here in Allentown. They had a guy out on medical leave and asked if I wanted to fill in. I was like, absolutely. So I was on staff for 6 months, which was a lot of fun, kind of going back to my roots and doing that, okay? At that time, I worked primarily, when I was doing newspaper work, I worked primarily with two lenses. Nightcore's 24 to 70 was not out yet. They had not released that lens in the early 2000s. So I used a 17 to 35 f2.8, which you can still buy that lens today. Sweet lens. I actually still prefer that lens. I don't own it anymore. And I still would, if I was going to go out and buy a short zoom tomorrow, I would buy the 17 to 35 over the 24 to 70. So I used the 70 to 35 on the short end, and I used the 70 to 200 on the high end, and then I always had a 50 millimeter in my bag. That was it. Done. Okay? But yes, those two lenses for photojournals, great kit to work with. Absolutely great kit to work with. Blue Serpent Media. Do I have any plans to attend Photokina 2018 next year in Europe, either as a visitor or an educator? Yes, absolutely. So, full disclosure, I am dying to go. My wife is on board with letting me go. We're going to try and make a vacation out of it, but because of the time of year that Photokina happens, given that she's a college professor, that's kind of right in the beginning of the school year, she may not be able to. I have already begun discussions with a couple companies whose software and gear that I promote and have been helping out to, you know, kind of work on covering a lot of costs, etc. So if I can go as an educator, that's wonderful. I have not been invited. I will be sending out some feelers with regard to that, but I definitely want to make it. I've never been to Photokina, so it's kind of like the Holy Grail. I've got a few people, Blue Serpent Media, that have been asking me about coming to the UK, and I have family in the UK. My mother was a World War II baby, grew up in the East End of London, was one of the children, group of 6 children actually, that were shipped out to different families. They were split up and shipped out to different families in the countryside during all the bombing. So I've been to England many, many times. Sadly, I have not been back in about 6 or 7 years now. So I would love to try and piece it all together, but one way or another, I definitely am hoping to make it to the UK. Even if I don't make it to Photokina, maybe make it over to one of the big photo salons that happen every year. So that's definitely, fingers crossed, it's coming. But Photokina, yes, that's a must. My plans, my current plans for next year are to attend Imaging USA in January, which will be in Nashville, WPPI in Vegas, which will be, let's see, the end of February. Of course, Photo Plus, which is October. That's right down the road for me. Anyway, for those of you that are in the East or on the East Coast that are coming to Photo Plus this year, October, I'll definitely be there. I'm not teaching, so I'm literally just going to be hanging out, wandering around. I will be filming a couple interviews while I'm in New York for Photo Plus, because fortunately I have access to the YouTube space, which is literally about a 5-minute taxi ride from the Javits Center. So I will be up there doing some, some stuff during Photo Plus. So I hope to see a lot of you guys there. Okay. Coast-to-coast imagery with portraiture. Do you shoot strictly autofocus or manual focus only from time to time? At this point in my career, I'm strictly an autofocus person. My eyes are not what they used to be. It's the getting old thing. So I can shoot manual focus, but it's a much, much slower process. Now, flip side of that, when I was using Sony for the brief 2 years that I had Sony, and even now when I use my Panasonic GH5, I will frequently do manual focus with them, but I use the zebra stripes, which make it so much easier to focus. But now, for the most part, I'm pretty much autofocus the whole time. So, Bill Jolie, what is your technique for knowing when to stop processing an image? Are you typically satisfied with your images, or do you need to make yourself stop? Are they ever perfect? I don't believe there is such a thing as perfect. And here's the reason. So here's my philosophy on perfect. I am a perfectionist. But I learned really, really early on in my career that that was a bad thing if left unchecked. And here's the reason. I would come up with an image, and this was back in the days before Photoshop. I would come up with an image that, as far as I was concerned, it was perfect. Everything I wanted to achieve, I achieved. Did it exactly the way I wanted. The image that I had in front of me was exactly what I imagined and planned for. And then, of course, I would show it to somebody else, and they would point out 3 things that they would do differently. Does that make them right or wrong? Or am I right or wrong? So the problem here with this photography stuff is there's so much subjectiveness to it. So where I put the perfection piece into play, it is an attitude. It is a philosophy. And really it equates more to a control factor. It's like I consider myself to be responsible for every element in a picture. You know, once I've pressed the button, I can't blame the makeup artist, I can't blame the model, I can't blame the light, the sun, the moon, whatever. It was my choice to press the button. So I'm a perfectionist in the standpoint that I exert tons of control and make absolute choices about every little detail that I can in the shot. When it comes to the post-processing, is it easy to overdo? Oh my God, yes. It's really easy to overdo. I frequently explain to people that when it comes to learning Photoshop, a lot of times it's like riding a roller coaster. You know, as you're learning new techniques, you get better and better and better. Your pictures get better and better. But all of a sudden, it's like you crest over the top and your work starts getting like worse and worse and worse. And the reason is because you're abusing and overusing that technique that you've just learned. So as you're coming back down the hill, you back off on it a little bit, things settle out, and then you start learning new techniques. And your work's and you're adding those techniques to the other technique. And your work's getting better and better and better and better and better. And you crest over the hill, and suddenly your work is starting to look like, ooh. And so like every so often, and we've all done it, every so often, you know you're getting better and better, but you kind of turn around and you look at work you've done like the last couple of weeks, and you realize like, oh my God, like I'm overdoing the frequency separation, or I'm overdoing the dodge and burn, or whatever. It's too much saturation, or I'm over sharpening. And it's not a matter of it being right or wrong or somebody else having the final say. It's simply a matter of you look at your work and kind of realize, oh yeah, you know what? That's the first thing I'm seeing when I look at the picture. So I find especially that's one of the easiest ways to tell if you're overdoing your processing techniques. If the first thing you realize when you look at a picture is, my God, look how sharp that is. Or the first thing you see is, my God, look at that. Her skin looks like a plastic Barbie doll. Like, then you know you're overdoing those techniques, because the minute even to a photographer, the minute one of those techniques becomes that obvious, it's not being done right. So I hope that helps. That's kind of how I look at it. So, coast to coast imagery, yeah, the zebra stripes are great. If you need to work on manual, they are awesome. And at least with my experience with Sony and with Panasonic, really, really accurate. They work really great. So, Sean Edward Calvino, when focusing, should you go for spot focusing on the eyes? I always focus on the eyes. If I'm photographing a person, a portrait especially, I'm always focusing on the eyes. That's the most important thing. And I am using the rule of thirds, not the composition rule of thirds. The focus / depth of field rule of thirds when I'm focusing on those eyes. For those of you that don't know what the hell I was just talking about, I'm a tough SOB and I'm not going to explain it. Go research it. If you do not thoroughly, inside out, backwards, in your sleep, have nightmares about it, if you do not thoroughly understand depth of field, you shouldn't be calling yourself a photographer. You shouldn't be taking money for your photography, and you're kidding yourself every time you buy a new piece of gear. Depth of field is the most incredibly important tool that a photographer has when it comes to the physics and the optics of taking pictures. So there are 3 rules that are always taught in terms of how to control depth of field, but technically there's a 4th rule that allows you to control depth of field. That's the one I just mentioned. But depth of field is not just blurry backgrounds in bokeh. gang. It's just not. So, let's see here. Joe, do you use focus peaking? No, I don't. I'm sorry. I don't use focus peaking on the GH5. I know I said the Panasonics and the Sonys. I do use the Zebras for the blown out highlights, Robert. So, Stephen, yes, some things are good. I don't know about that, but we'll see. So, Tertula Marian, give you some advices for a beginner. Seriously, I'm not trying to be a jerk. That's one of those questions. My advice is get off of YouTube. Turn this video off right now. Go pick up your camera. Because if you're a beginner and you're asking me such a broad question, and I mean it sincerely, I swear to you, I am not trying to be mean. Stop watching YouTube. Go take pictures. You got to go screw stuff up. You got to take good pictures and you got to take a ton of bad pictures. And take the time to learn what you're doing wrong. That's going to drive the questions that you need to ask. That's going to drive what YouTube videos you should be watching. And that's going to help you grow. You can get tons and tons of watching YouTube videos. It's the equivalent of getting book knowledge, right? You can shove a lot of that information into your head, but if you're not out there putting it all to use, and if the questions you're asking are not being driven by mistakes and issues and things like that, then you're not really going to learn. So sincerely, I am thrilled that you're here. I appreciate it. I love the support that I get from all of you, but I can't stress it enough. If you're asking questions that are that wide open, meaning you're very early in the process, take a break from YouTube. Take a break from Facebook and all those things when it comes to photography and get out and take pictures. Just take pictures. Again, I love social media. I love technology. I love YouTube. Hey, here I am. But I am so glad none of that stuff was around when I was a kid because I had no choice but to go out and take pictures and try and learn how to solve problems, period. That's the key. So as a beginner, Troy, the hardest thing I found to learn is seeing the light. It takes a lot of practice, Troy. A lot of practice. I know you've been working on it. That's what you have to do. You have to just keep working on it. So, all right, gang, listen, as usual, I'm over the hour. Big shocker. Hey, so look, I left it right till the end this time. So do me a quick favor before we leave. If you would, it would be greatly appreciated. Follow me on the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. Please subscribe if you haven't done that already. And of course, thumbs up is always greatly appreciated. And when I sign off here, it would be great if you could make a quick comment. Always greatly appreciated. And then just a reminder, the video that just went up. And by the way, just so you know, this is not like a gear video all about PhotoFlex and all that. It is a video that talks about the Rapidome, but it's also got the whole second half of the video is a shoot with some nice little tips about shooting in the studio, shooting the location, etc. And one other little piece of information I wanted to give you guys, just a little brag, but just to let you know something that's coming up here. The press release just went out today. The announcement was made. A lot of you use Savage seamless paper backgrounds. Well, Savage has named me one of their featured photographers. I'm very honored to say I'm in some amazing company with people like Clay Cook. But if you scroll down on that page here and click on the Learn More, why I'm really telling you about this, there's an article that I wrote for Savage. It's really not about me, even though the headline makes you think that. It says why I've used seamless paper backgrounds for 40 years. The reason I'm pointing this out to all of you is in the middle, there are 6 really, really useful tips for storing and working with your seamless paper background rolls. So if you do use seamless paper backgrounds, and indeed I do sincerely feel Savage is the best. I've used them for my entire photography career. I would encourage you to check those tips out so that you can save yourself some money along the way. It's not saving money when it comes to buying, it's saving money on making sure that your backgrounds are going to last as long as possible. Because let's face it, that's the challenge with a paper backdrop. It's easy to damage them and they wear out. So you always want to make them last as long as possible. So check out those tips. I think that you will find them to be really, really helpful. So, all right, gang, get out there, take a bunch of pictures. I'll be back here Monday night. Later in the week, part 2 of the smartphone series will be coming out. And remember, part 2 is the one about how your smartphone can make you better with your DSLR. So I'll let you in a little secret. Basically, what I'm going to do with you, I'm going to share with you all of the apps that I use, for processing my iPhone pictures, but more importantly, all the apps that I use to help me with my DSLR. Apps that I use for location planning, apps that I use for lighting, all kinds of stuff. There's some really, really amazing apps out there. And I'll be honest with you, I know that there's a lot of apps that I don't know about. So selfishly, a big part of the reason why I'm going to do that video is to get the conversation started, because I know that people will be really quick to post, hey, I like this app for this reason. So I'll be able to find out about some new ones too. So in the meantime, gang, you know the drill. Please remember these words. Thanks for watching another live episode of TogChat. Now go pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot, well, it's your next shot. So keep learning, keep thinking, and keep shooting. Adios.